Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
So, like I said, there's a lot of topics that are touched on in this episode, and probably will end up touching on multiple topics as we go tonight. But one I wanted to talk a little bit about is this custom that is mentioned. It actually came up a little bit last week about Tallit, and it came up sort of more strongly tonight about this minhag, this Ashkenazi minhag for unmarried men not to wear talitot. Now, this comes up in the case of Amir, who continues to wear his talis. He was married, but then he ceased to be married, and that's actually sort of its own question. This comes up with head coverings as well, for women who cover their head if they get married. I mean, this came up here as well. If a woman was married and then gets divorced and now is back in the dating scene, should she continue to cover her hair because she was married? Sort of similar with Tallit a little bit, and here they note Amir's Sfardim. Sfardim wear Tallit from Bar Mitzvah, period. There's no minhag of no custom of not wearing Tallit until you're married, but it is a pretty prevalent custom, and it's one of these things there's not really significant sources about. The first mention of it we have is from the Maharil, who's an Ashkenazi, in the Middle Ages, posek, but he writes about it not as like a thing that should be done, but as a thing that he has seen done in his area, that men who aren't married don't wear talis. And we see in some later sources, like the Mishnah Brura, who's a 19th century commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, who says this is terrible. Why are men not wearing a talis? Like, you're above bar mitzvah age, you should be wearing a talis. But again, it remains, I would say, the predominant custom in Orthodox Ashkenazi communities, for men who are not married to not wear a talis. So is that something? Oh.
No, I was just going to say, and in some conservative communities, I think that it just depends on whether or not you grew up in a house where when you got your talis, you were told you're going to wear this for your bar mitzvah, but then you're not going to have a talis until, you're married. I know that I went to rabbinical school and grew up with some men who would wear a talis on the bima, like if they were davening or leading something, but it was not theirs. So they would borrow someone else's. So like at their bar mitzvah, they wore their dad's or something. But then they didn't get one until they were married. So they didn't have their own until they were married.
Yeah. And I think, we're not just going to talk about that particular minhag of Ashkenazi men not wearing talis. I think, we can talk more broadly about talis and sort of the way that Tallit, there's numerous sort of dimensions, though, in talking about, men and women and sort of is this a commandment, or a custom that differs between men and women? And also, I think even stylistically, like I know, I have my bar mitzvah talis that is still in my dad's synagogue in the library, which hasn't been worn very frequently because stylistically it's very different, right? I would say it's more sort of decorative, and is a very different style than like the common, I guess, Orthodox style, which is more square, you would say, and sort of bigger. And even that, like I wear a talis, for example, when I'm in shul on Shabbos morning because of being in a rabbinic role and so forth. But if I'm on my own, I typically won't. But I think I mentioned the story last week, that I went to my brother-in-law's shul, his former shul in Baltimore, and I came in without a talis, and someone quickly ran over him and put a talis on me. So it's one of these things that there's really divergent practice around, and yet people seem to often think that, the practice that they see that they're used to is sort of the correct practice or the right way to do it.
I would say that also, even if you wear a tallis all the time, like my siblings wear a tallit whenever they're in shul, and my brother at his wedding still was gifted a tallis from his now wife. So that practice, which stems from a custom of not wearing a tallit until you're married, still is practiced at a wedding by certain people, not by everybody, to still be given a tallit that then will be used kind of as your tallis moving forward. And his bar mitzvah tallis was used as their chuppah, but he was given a tallit by his wife at his wedding, which actually has a very sweet story. My brother's a big baseball fan, and he has always wanted a jersey for some guy. And so he, thank you for laughing. I have no idea who it was for. But my sister-in-law, his wife, had him turn around to like have a moment in his tallit. And when she turned him around, she took out, instead of a tallit, a jersey and put it over his shoulders. And he thought in his mind, oh, this is a terrible tallis. It's going to be too small. Why is it this weird fabric? And then obviously he realized what it was, and she gave him a very beautiful tallis. But can be a very cute moment, but is also a very sweet moment for people who choose to do that at a wedding, even if they've worn a tallis up until the day of their marriage.
Also note, and I'll comment on some of the chat that I saw Norm's chat, which I'll talk about in a moment, about sort of like the sociological dimension of Tallit, which is very strong. Before I mention that, though, I wanted to, I might lose my chain of thought, so I might get to, first I'll talk about Norm, and then I'll say what I was going to say. So Norm talks about, the sort of the sociological piece about why, wearing a tallis and no one talking to him. So that's certainly a prevalent thing that when you go to a shul, especially in the more, I guess, old style synagogues where women were up on the balcony and men were down below, right? It made it really easy to know who's available and who's not, because you from the cheap seats up on top, you can look down and see who has a tallis on, and there's even an idea with the tallis about sort of putting it over your head, and so with that, they're sort of like, okay, well, all those people are out. I'm not interested in them, or I might be interested in, it's easier than finding a ring to see if someone's wearing a wedding ring,
especially from the cheap seats.
Especially from the cheap seats, exactly. So, so there's that piece as well, which frankly might be part of the reasoning that this custom developed, and not being about, halacha, or really where it's sort of derived from is the juxtaposition in the Torah and in Deuteronomy of the commandment of wearing tzitzit, of wearing, fringes on your garments. And then immediately afterwards, it talks about if a man marries a woman and comes to hate her and, wants to divorce her and so forth. But that juxtaposition of, if a man, wear fringes on your garments, and then if a man marries a woman, so that seems to be where, at least the Maharil, this sort of earliest source that we have, who mentions it, seems to derive it from that juxtaposition of, because it says wear tallit and then says when you get married, so we only wear tallit when you get married. I did want to talk. What was that?
When you get married and if you hate the woman, you have to finish the sentence.
Right. Well, right. It goes on if you hate the woman. So.
But I think that this goes back to a conversation that we've had previously about just like the sociological aspects of garments and what you wear, and if you cover your head and if you don't cover your head, and the story about you going to Joel's shul and someone giving you a tallis, right? Like, I think that it just proves that if a woman is to be sitting in the cheap seats, which I'm never going to let you live down that you call them that if you are sitting above and looking down and a man just like happens to not be wearing a tallis because he either just got there or he forgot it and doesn't want to wear one of the shul ones, whatever, that you might have in your mind something very different than what this person either is trying to project or even knows that he's projecting. And that's a very interesting piece of Judaism that goes along with a lot of different stylings of how people dress and how people wear certain religious garments. So not just the tallis, but this this element of a custom of wearing a tallis also plays into that in a very interesting, and I would venture to say problematic way.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to, I guess, make 2 points. One, the one I was going to make before, and then one in response to Michael. You keep dropping things in the chat. It's great because it, gives me things to respond to. So Michael's talking about making tallisim in camp. And I remember when I taught in Atlanta, so in Atlanta there's like at least four Jewish day schools. There's a Reform Jewish day school, a conservative Jewish day school, a sort of community / modern Orthodox day. Well, I guess now it's more modern Orthodox and a more like, say, right-wing Orthodox. Plus there's probably more. But I had friends who taught it, most of them, including one friend who taught at the Reform day school. And they, I think it was 8th grade, it might be 7th grade, the Judaics curriculum for the entire year was making a tallis for the entire year. And it was like really, really in depth about like learning fabrics and learning to work with fabrics and learning about knots and tzitzit. And that was the entire curriculum for the year. And then designing the tallis and learning how to dye and learning, right? It was like this really, really in-depth kind of thing. And this friend, who I think at first kind of liked it because it was like a year-long project. And eventually she's like, this is ridiculous that for like my 7th graders, that there's no other Jewish content the entire year in their Jewish day school other than making a tallis. And at one point she asked them, like, if they plan on wearing this beyond or other than their bar or bat mitzvahs, and they all said, no, we'll wear for our bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. That's it. And so it was like this idea, like the entire year. And like, fine, yeah, they got to learn different skills of dyeing and tying knots and whatever. But like this whole project culminated in something that they planned on using once, but not, and some of them not even once because they were going to wear the one that they got in Israel. Their parents got in Israel when they went there. So yeah.
No, before you go to your next topic or next comment, I just want to say that I teach girls how to make tallit all the time. It's the way that I first felt comfortable as an adult wearing a tallis was making my own. And so I've done that a lot with girls. Actually, Hannah might have been in my class once at Ramah. I teach girls at Ramah how to make tallitot. I also have done it in religious schools. And I think that there is something, I've never done it for an entire year, but I think that there is something very powerful, especially for girls, learning what goes into the kavanah, the intentionality around specifically the tzitzit and the tying of them and the what the rabbis intended for people to kind of have in mind or at least not be doing while tying tzitzit onto a tallis. Because for girls, again, I can't speak for boys because I'm not one and I also haven't taught the class to boys, but the idea of a girl really owning the mitzvah that she doesn't even know to be hers and being able to make that garment somehow feels much more attached to her than just being given one. And so girls who have made them at Ramah with me or elsewhere talk about how they don't always feel comfortable wearing a tallis, but if they are going to wear a tallis, they will wear the one they made because it feels like a blanket almost, like something that they were given that is a security garment that they can wear, and that changes the mitzvah for them. It changes it into something that is comfortable as opposed to something that they were once ostracized from doing. Sorry, your second comment.
Yeah, well, I'll keep delaying that second comment to respond to the Friedman's point. So there's two different, when we talk about wearing a tallis or wearing tzitzit, we're really talking about two different things. Right, so it says in the Torah that you should put tzitzit on the corners of your garments. Of course, most of our garments today don't have corners. Back in the day, right, it's much easier. I'm not a big sewer, or tailor, but it's much easier, I believe, to sew a garment with corners than a kind of rounded garment. But nowadays, most of our garments are rounded. So you might think, and you might even say, the mitzvah is to put tzitzit on your four-cornered garment. If you don't have a four-cornered garment, there's no mitzvah of tzitzit. but then you're missing out on the mitzvah of tzitzit. It says, you should look at them and it says in Numbers when the mitzvah of tzitzit is mentioned that, you look at them and remember that, remember God, and it stops you from straying after your heart and so forth. So we, most, let's say, Orthodox men or men who keep this mitzvah wear tzitzit, which is a four-cornered garment that's typically worn throughout the day under your clothing. So I have a Tallit katan, or it's usually just called tzitzit, that I wear under my shirt every day, and that's sort of always on, and that's regardless of whether or not you've been married. And you fulfill the mitzvah of wearing tzitzit, you say the bracha, and so forth. Then separately from that, there is an additional minhag of wearing a talit gadol, a big talis, during shachari, during the morning service, when you say the Shema, because you're supposed to hold the corners of the garments when you're saying the Shema. And that's the one specifically that we're saying you don't, or there's a custom not to wear until you're married, is specifically the talit gadol, the big talis, and not the tzitzis that are under your clothes. When it comes to blessings, there's actually different blessings for them. So if you only wear one garment, you say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mitzvat tzitzit. And that's the blessing on wearing tzitzit. When you put on a talit, you say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahitatef b'tzitzit, who commands us to wrap tzitzit. And that's because the talit, the big talit is something that you wrap around. You're actually supposed to, when you say the blessing, wrap it around your head. Sort of close your eyes and wrap it around your head. So the mitzvah there's this strong association with wrapping, with putting it on or around your head. So, so there actually are different blessings. Now, if you're only putting on one, if you're only putting on tzitzis, you only say the al mitzvat tzitzit and not the lihitatef bat tzitzit. So we do actually have two separate blessings for that. Okay, I'm going to get to that second point now, though. One value of not wearing a talit until your wedding, and Rabbi Schatz mentioned this custom of, the bride giving the groom a talit for the wedding. She was talking about her sister-in-law and her brother. One reason that that's helpful, we might not have thought about, is that there's one blessing that people really want to say under the chuppah at a wedding that is not part of the wedding ceremony. This comes up a lot. People feel like this is a blessing that of all times to say this blessing, this would seem to be the time. Anyone have an idea of what blessing I'm talking about?
No.
This has never come up for you?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. So often people say, at my wedding, I want to say Shehechianu. Right? It feels like the Shehechianu blessing about Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'kiyanu azman hazeh, that God has kept me alive and sustained me and brought me to this day.
I was going to say that. I just think it would have been that obvious.
Okay, so Terrell's on board with me.
We have 9 other brachas we're going to say.
There's what?
We have 9 other brachas we're going to say.
We have lots of other brachas. Yeah, 9 other brachas. But people feel like if ever there was a Shehechianu moment, this would be it. This would be the time to say Shehechianu.
Well, especially for people who get married every year.
Good
point. So this is something that comes up often, that people say, I really want to say Shehechianu at my wedding, and you say, sorry, it's not part of the wedding ceremony. As strange as it is, we don't say Shehechianu at a wedding, except that you can say Shehechianu on a new garment. And so I've seen this done, that the bride gives the groom a talis, and then it's a new talis, and then he says the Shehechianu at some point, and that's sort of like, okay, now it works. I said, you can say Shehechianu on a new talis, but not on getting married. So, or on a new shirt, for that matter. I've seen people utilize that little loophole to get a Shehechianu at their wedding. You've never seen this?
I have never heard Shehechianu at a wedding, ever.
Interesting. Okay.
And I've never gotten that question.
Surprising. I've heard that come up numerous times. So.
Never heard that. Renee just asked, did we mention the stain on the tallis and why? What do you mean why, Renee?
Like, I don't know whether it was just like a stain, like momish spilled something on it, or whether there was like some significance to it in relation to his marriage.
I think that he just spilled, I mean, unless you read more into it than I did, Rabbi Pernick, I think that it just was that his tallis was dirty and he didn't know what to do with it because when he was wearing a tallis, it was when he had a wife and she knew what to do with it. But now that he had a dirty tallis, he didn't know where to take it or what to do with it. But Debbie has an idea.
I actually don't even know that there really was a stain on there. I think it is a metaphor for his guilt that he feels about having sex with his ex-wife. And because he's shown us before that he has this weird sort of fantasy life. And I think it's a metaphor.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, definitely there's guilt around the tallis, right? Because then when we see the last episode, moment in the episode where he's in shul and he's not wearing a tallis and he kind of looks around to see if anybody else is noticing that he's not wearing a tallis, which obviously no one else cares. But yeah, I guess that's possible. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, it occurred to me also that there was a psychological shtick to it, and especially when he had that dream about it too. Yeah, that kind of reinforced to me that was some kind of they were doing some kind of play on it, but I didn't know if even separate from the play on it, if there was actually like some kind of a religious thing that, you know, the woman is supposed to throw coffee on a tallis or something on a tallis when they divorce. I don't know.
That would be awesome if that was something that was like part of the get ceremony, like throw coffee on a tallis. No, it's not.
Because like Josh was saying, that in many communities, in many kahals, the man doesn't wear a tallis until after he's married. So if by the same token, if he's now no longer married, so they, you know, it's a way of permanently, or could be a way of permanently making him not be able to wear that tallis anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, you can go.
I'm just thinking, you know, now, so I certainly understood it to be symbolic, but I'm interested in Debbie's point about it perhaps being, you know, totally metaphorical and there actually not being a stain, which isn't something I thought about before. And I'm sort of in my mind replaying this scene at the laundromat where he seems to be making a big deal of it. Like, is it going to be okay? And the guy's like, yeah. And when he gives it to the woman who works there and she kind of takes a glance at it, right? It doesn't seem like she's like, oh, look at that big stain. I'll have to like scrub it or whatever.
But I don't think he's worried about it because of the stain. I think he's worried about it just like when you take a tallis to a place in Los Angeles, you're worried they're going to undo the knots because they don't.
Yeah. No, right. But but I'm wondering about just the way that she kind of like glanced at it, like if there was actually a stain there, if it was totally a figment of his imagination.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I love that take on it. I hope you're right. Because it's a much more interesting take. Esther asked a very interesting question, and because I've never heard of shehechianu at a wedding, I'll let you answer it. But she said, isn't a wedding ring a new item? So when a bride, at least, is given a ring, isn't that something you could say shehechianu over?
Right, except there's already a thing that we say when we give the ring, right? That it's, right, there's like a line that we say when we give the ring. So if we wanted to insert shehechianu into the ring giving process, we would have, you know, it would have been inserted presumably into the ring giving process. You know, instead we say the harei at and so forth.
But could you, if, now we're getting to a whole another topic, but I'm curious of your answer. Could you, if you're doing a double ring ceremony, even if you do it after the ketubah as like an exchange of ketubah for ring, could you do it there because there doesn't have to be a phrase said?
I guess that's also a question I haven't looked into about whether you would say shehechianu on a new piece of jewelry.
I mean,
you certainly can, meaning I know that you say shehechianu on a new garment, or you can say shehechianu on new garments. I haven't seen it discussed about, you know, we don't just throw around blessings willy-nilly generally. You know, you have to make sure there's a legitimate reason to recite a blessing. So like, even though we don't think in our days of it as a big deal, it's that, you know, we have sources that say you say shehechianu on a new garment. Now, keep in mind, for them, getting a new garment was a much bigger deal than it is for us. So I'm not sure when it comes to jewelry. I haven't seen it discussed whether you can say Shechianu, and I would think
Norm is right in exactly what I was mentioning, which is that when we don't have to get into this.
The man says Harayat, the woman doesn't necessarily say anything.
Right. Well, the woman doesn't have to necessarily even give a ring, but if they decide as a couple to have the ketubah given to her to then be able to give a ring to him, then definitely Harayat isn't said, or Harayata wouldn't be said, but could you use something? I mean, people come up with phrases all the time to say. I don't know. Let's look into it. I'm interested.
As long as it's not a blessing, right? I think the question is, can you insert a blessing in a time that's not the prescribed time to say that blessing?
Then why is it not a blessing? Then why can't you?
Because it's not a new garment. And again, I know we say you can say Shechianu for new garments. I don't know if you can say it for new jewelry.
Okay, we're gonna look into it. Okay. Michael wrote something about Rachel Salston. Yeah. So it is mandatory at JTS to wear tefillin for both genders. It is not at Ziegler. A female can wear tefillin one morning with repercussions. Okay. Before I read that
it was at the time, this was long ago, it was considered a very negative incident, and an order came down, thou shalt never be allowed to do that again in the conservative movement. Little did anyone know what was about to happen a few years later.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because at Ramah, I think I've mentioned this in this class before, but at Ramah, every year that I worked there as any kind of leadership, we had conversations about if we're going to make this mandatory for men, should we also make it mandatory for, or not men, but boys, should we make it mandatory for girls? And the answer has always been no at the Ramah that I grew up at. And that's part of the reason that I responded to Norm's question the way I did, because I think that, yes, it is normalized, but it's still not seen as something that's done by all girls or all women. And so the few that do it are few and far between and also pop up in all these different places. But I will tell you as a female that growing up in a world where you heard and you've heard me say this many times now, where you grew up hearing, boys, you must wear kippah, tallit, and tefillin, and then nothing was ever said to the girls, it's hard to then decide all of a sudden by yourself that you're going to start wearing those things. So tallit is definitely one of them. For me personally, tefillin is much more substantial in that category than tallit, but and kippah probably all the more so. Yeah, Renee, you have a question? Yeah.
I looked it up, and on this source called alttorah.org, I don't know how legit it is, but it says women say shehechianu on engagement rings, but not on wedding rings, and on valuable candlesticks. And men say shehechianu on a new tallit, but they don't say shehechianu on tefillin.
Right.
And the only items of attire that get a shehechianu are those that are worn for enjoyment or importance. It's subjective.
What's the source for that, Renee, that you said?
Outtorah.org.
Outtorah.org. Okay. I mean, that sounds about right. Again, I don't know if they're saying
Torah. Yeah.
But I think that's right. I'm just
on the OU, so I think it's probably right.
Oh, outorah.org.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. outorah.org is. I can't disagree with them because whatever. We're an OU shul. So but that seems accurate. Definitely.
But interesting that if you decided that it had some kind of value, that you could say it on it.
Yeah.
So if the husband decided that it was in that category, you could say a shehechianu on it.
Meaning, if the woman gives the husband a ring,
yes,
she could give him a ring, and he could say shehechianu.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from this, yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
I didn't follow that, but yes,
if it's a double ring ceremony, the woman can give the husband a ring, and he could say shehechianu.
But no, on the wedding rings, no. It says engagement ring. Women say it on engagement rings, but not on wedding rings.
For a woman, though.
It doesn't say anything about a man saying.
Yeah.
It's OU Torah, and then Orthodox.
That's because Yes, they would not be considering a man getting a ring at a wedding. So that's why. But we can get into this another time. It'll come up, I promise. Okay, back to Tallitot. I saw someone else had a hand or a question. No? Went away? Karen did ask about toilet paper, but we have to first make sure that we've gone through all of Tallit before we get to toilet paper.
Yeah, and yeah, Leonard.
I'm looking at a website over here called jewishideas.org. Not quite clear who these people are, but it appears to be an Orthodox website. And they quote various authorities here regarding whether or not Shechianu should be recited at a wedding. And I guess it's not surprising. There's a lot of different opinions, including Shechianu should be recited, or Shechianu should be recited below Shemu Malchut. In other words, you don't mention God's name. Or Shechianu should be recited, but practically we're not sure when to recite it, so therefore then we don't. And then finally, Shechianu should definitely not be recited at a wedding. So take your choice.
Yeah.
Sounds very Jewish.
I mean, and that's Jewish. So that website is Rabbi Mark Angel, who's like very sort of closely. So we would put him in the box of my yeshiva. If we put him in a box, he didn't go to my yeshiva, but like that kind of liberal, but like not way afield to modern Orthodox. So yeah, no, he's like very much an accepted scholar in the modern Orthodox world, and that that's a journal that they publish, the Jewish Ideas and Ideals. So but I mean, I think that's because with the wedding, with a traditional wedding process, it's sort of we have all the steps. The steps are very clear. There's kiddushin, at least for like the ultimate traditional wedding. You have ketubah, and then you have kiddushin, in which the man gives the woman a ring and says "Harei at" and so forth, and then and they drink wine. Kiddushin's done. Then you have chuppah or nisuin, and with the sheva brachot. So it's like if we wanted to have shechianu as part of the standard process, it would have been plugged in there. But once you start adding other things beyond the standard, now suddenly you have room to add in potentially other blessings, potentially other items. Like you said, if someone said, I want to give my husband a ring and I want him to say shechianu there, like that seems like something that should be reasonable. I don't see that should be a problem. But I know actually I remember my friend Levi, that was like the shomer for his wedding, and I think he already had been wearing that tallis for a couple of days, but he put on it was a new suit or something like that, and he was like, that's this way I get to say a shechianu. So there is that kind of that holding on to that idea. So yeah, good little tangent there into laws of shechianu, which is always fun. Anything else about tallis before we can sort of open it up to other questions or things from the episode we want to talk about, like dating multiple people at the same time?
Just gonna stay away from toilet paper.
Or toilet paper. I'm happy to talk about toilet paper.
Okay.
You know what? Yeah.
No, you can do.
Go for it, Rabbi Schatz.
I don't know.
Choose whichever secondary topic you want.
They were much more interested in dating two people at once than they were about toilet paper. Okay. I care about the toilet paper, but you should do your dating two people business. Go ahead.
I mean, that's the truth. I don't really have that much to say about it. They quote from Rav Aviner, who's like a big contemporary Israeli rabbi, about dating two people at the same time. I mean, like halachically, it's not really a thing. Dating's not really like a thing halachically. So there's no reason you couldn't be dating multiple people at the same time. It's more, whoever was saying before, I forget if it was it, I'm going to forget who said it, about sort of the like romantic, the rom-com setup kind of situation. Practically it might be unwise, especially two people who might cross paths with one another. Who might invite both to a Shabbos meal or things like that, and so forth. But halachically, there's no reason you couldn't, other than the possibility of something like this happening, or both people finding out and dumping you at the same time. But that's
But I also think there's something very different, and I'm being serious about this. There's something very different about dating two men in that world than dating two men in a modern, liberal, no worries about Shomer Negia, no worries about Yichud world. Because when you're dating two men in that world, you're going for coffee with two different people, right? You're getting to know them for sure, but it's not the same kind of intimate dating that you might expect from two people, in the Pico Robertson, well, maybe not, and in the Los Angeles area, who are just dating people, in which I think that when we talk about dating, we have to kind of qualify what are we saying, right? That she's not doing anything wrong by having coffee with one guy and having coffee with the other guy, except for the fact that she's not honest, right? She should be honest about that. That's the biggest problem. But the fact that they both come to Shabbat dinner, it's weird, but it's not, there's nothing wrong with it. She's not doing anything wrong. It's not like she has an intimate relationship, a sexually intimate relationship with both of them. She's just getting to know them both. And so I think that it's important for us to make those categorizations because it's a very different kind of dating world than the world that we would imagine here. Yeah, Barbara.
I disagree with you. I don't think that it would be a girl's responsibility to tell two different guys that she's seeing somebody else. The fact that she was stupid enough to invite them both for dinner and they both first said no and then they said yes and they both showed up, that's stupidity. That's plain out and out dumbness. But I don't think when I was young, I don't remember if I was dating two guys that I ever told the second guy, oh, by the way, you got competition. I'm dating someone else too. That'd be dumb too. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, no,
to get to know the person, because the only way you're ever going to find the right person, unless you're an Orthodox and they fix you up with someone, say that's who you're going to marry. Mm-hmm. In our culture, in the conservative and Reform, I mean, we're not Reform, but you have to see multiple people till you find the right person.
Yeah. I actually don't think that we're disagreeing. I think that I agree with you. I think that the point at which they were both at dinner with her, I think that is a moment when, the honesty, the point of honesty shouldn't have come from what's his face, from the toilet paper guy. What's his name? Avery. It shouldn't have come from him that they were both people who she was interested in. It should have come from her. I think at that point is all I'm saying. I agree with you that if she's going for coffee with two different guys, like, okay, Hareza Meshubach, she should, marry one of them and be in good health. Okay, Eileen, yeah.
Just unmute yourself, Eileen. Eileen, you're still muted. Just unmute.
That's okay. We can try to read your lips. Wait, you're still muted. You're still muted. You're still... Eileen, just unmute yourself. Yeah, okay. There you go.
Okay. I was trying. I just couldn't go. I'm sorry.
No.
I think the difference here is that the one young man asked her to marry him, and that she asked to delay for a short time to get to know each other. So that I think that he was really under the impression that this was going to lead, hopefully, to marriage. So the surprise of finding out that there she is dating somebody else or trying to get to know somebody else was really confusing and a bit unfair to him.
Okay. Yeah, and I think to sort of touch on Barbara's points, I wouldn't necessarily characterize, the Orthodox dating, even in the frommest circles, it's not usually like, this is who you're going to marry. Sometimes it's like, okay, see each other one time and then we'll, close the deal. But there is an idea that you have to at least, you have to have met the person before you get engaged to them. But you're right here in that, from Yochai's point of view, it's like we have this kind of intimacy. They have the Shabbos walk together and so forth, and it's kind of like, okay, great, like let's get married. This seems good. And she says, let's see if we're compatible, and fine. And you're right that like for her living in the swamp, it's perhaps not as strange to like, okay, I'm going to try, I'm going to talk to this guy, I'm going to talk to that guy, like. we'll sort of figure out what makes sense. But for someone like Yochai, who's sort of thinking, right, and she even comments, like, all of your questions are about marriage. She's very focused on, like, marriage and the idea that she's dating someone else. She's still sort of checking out the scene. It's very much in a different place than he seemed to think they were in. So,
but remember that Yochai is also reacting to something, right? He kissed her. He now feels badly about, I don't think he regrets it, but he feels badly about it. And he is reacting. He's trying to understand, how much money do you make so that when we have kids, you can be the breadwinner? What will it look like when we're married one day? He wants to make sure that on this list that he has in his mind, that he's ticking off all those boxes. Whereas when and I love what Norm said, that Orthodox dating can actually be seen as more intimate because you start talking about the things that are most important to you, as opposed to just kind of the courting flirtation that can go on for way too long. And yet, I assume you mean Rachel, your wife. Norm, is that what you mean? Okay. Characterizes Orthodox dating as almost a job interview, right? Which is what we see with Yochai and Reut of, tell me how much you make, what will our life look like with children, and that's difficult. It's difficult to get to know someone when all they're trying to do is see if you fit into these categories of, a to-do list that they've put together to find the person they're supposed to be with.
And yet she kind of seems intrigued by it because of how different it is, right? She's used to a certain, right? She even talks about how it's like dating them is like pizza and ice cream. Like, it's just so different. Like, the fact that he has no idea and is like so shocked at what she makes because she's just a totally different world than he is. He's tutoring bar mitzvah lessons, is making enough money to like put food on the table, but that's it. And she's like a professional. I think there's something about that. Right? And she even says this when she sort of chooses him. Like, the fact that you don't know my world is like a plus in a lot of ways. It's also a negative, but it's a plus in certain ways too.
But I think we're pointing out two different things. I agree with you. I think that she's intrigued by the fact that he comes from a different world. Like, he doesn't understand the world that she lives in, that she could be someone who's both interested in being a wife and a mother, but also someone who's very successful in her job. He doesn't understand that. And yet I still think that the date itself is very transactional. There's nothing sweet. There's nothing romantic. There's nothing, there's nothing like visionary about it, right? It's all about what can you do to make sure that when we have a family or when we're together one day, everything will be taken care of. But I agree. I think that she's intrigued by the fact that there's like some mystery to him that she doesn't understand yet and wants to get to know.
Okay, I'll call him Barbara in 1 second. I just want to add one piece, which is that I think in that scene where he's in front of the mirror, right, he's like trying to, I think the way the date falls out, I think is not actually the way he anticipated. I think he was like, okay, I'm going to be cool. He's trying out which kippah looks best. He's trying out different lines in the mirror. Like, I think in his mind coming in, he wasn't thinking I need to check off this list. It was like, okay, like I haven't dated before. Like, let me try this. Let me figure out like how do I look when I say these lines? And then it just kind of ends up falling into this very transactional thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that was his intent. Okay, Barbara.
I think that he's extremely naive as far as dating because he is into the transactional aspect. But even before he gets into that, it was a major thing when he agreed to teach her Haftarah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for him to be involved with a woman in any way, almost the amount of time he spent with her, his thinking was wife right from practically the second or third time he ever dealt with her. And she wasn't thinking that. She wanted to learn Haftarah. Mm-hmm. And she was thinking maybe about it as they went further a little bit there, but like you just said, I mean, she was in a different world than he was in. So his thinking was just completely off from what she was thinking. And she was shocked at his thinking, I think. I think she couldn't, even though she's religious, she wasn't as religious as he was that way because she didn't see why she couldn't talk to a man, whereas he thought talking to a woman. I couldn't believe it many years ago when I went to Israel, and I went to dinner at some friend's place, and the girl had married a guy who was super froomy, and I hadn't met the guy. And at the dinner table, he didn't look at me, barely said a word to me, and as soon as he finished eating, left. Now, the girl's brother was also there with his wife, and I'd taken care of both of them for their eyes when they were in L.A. And he stayed and talked to me and looked at me. And during dinner, I said, why are you, if you've gotten so froomy, why are you looking at me? Why are you talking to me? He says, how could I not? You're my family friend. You've been my doctor. How could I not do it? But the brother-in-law and the husband of the girl, I mean, I was in shock at seeing this. I mean, they don't even want to talk to somebody, even though they're married. And I knew he was married. I wasn't coming after him. He was way too young for me.
Well, we all know you look very young for your age, Barbara, so it's possible that he thought you were. But the fact of the matter is that there are different ways in which, and Barbara just wrote this in the chat, that there are different ways in which just starting interactions are slippery slopes for those who don't know how to deal with those interactions, right? So I actually think that the moment in which Rayut kind of knew that this might be going somewhere was, I think it was the second time that she studied with him, and he heard her voice louder than his own, and all of a sudden that really bothered him. And what she knows from her own background and from his is that he is not supposed to be listening to anyone's voice who might, seduce him is the word that's coming to mind, but might somehow make her seem more attractive. And I think that that's when she understood, okay, maybe he sees me in a different way because he's paying very close attention to what he's hearing, to how he's interacting with me in that kind of a way. You said something else that I was going to respond to, but that's all for now.
Sure.
Rabbi Pernick, sorry.
No, I mean, I think obviously you can keep on talking about that, but I think that largely kind of covers what I would have said about them. For me, I think the moment was when she says that she's doing it, because of her father's yahrzeit, and it's this, and he talks about, how he lost his father, and that's kind of this point of connection. That you get the sense that it's not a regular, teacher-student kind of thing. There's there's some deeper levels of connection here. Yeah. But any other sort of last points or questions to close with before we call it a night?
There's another program happening for Beth Am right now, which is why some people had to leave.
Nice.
But you guys are awesome anyway.
Thanks.
What's happening?
Thank you.
There's a sisterhood event right now.
For Rosh Chodesh. For Rosh Chodesh.
Okay, but what, before we, yes, but yeah, okay.
To go to that.
I can definitely send you the link. Any final thoughts, questions, counter sermons, comments?
Rip toilet paper before Shabbat, everyone.
It was my topic. I was excited about it. Now you're going to leave us with your thoughts?
Make sure you rip toilet paper. Even Aubrey does it.
Wait, is that a real thing to rip your toilet paper before Shabbat?
Oh, gosh, is it a real thing?
Yes.
Absolutely.
We will talk about it next week, even if just for a brief moment, because that was not nice or fair. We will talk about it next week.
Because I want to know Rabbi Schatz.
Looking forward to hearing what you have to say about toilet paper.
Thank you.
Yes, and especially if you don't rip enough.
There are rabbis who go into that because they had nothing better to talk about, so they talk about it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
See you in the morning, Rebecca.
You want to know.
Important topic.
Send me, please.
Thank you, Josh.
Rebecca, send me that thing because I did forget it.
Go to the TBA for the week at a glance. It's on there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, cool.
All right. Lila Tov, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night. Happy Hanukkah.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.